Good morning and welcome to this meeting of the Strategic Policing and Crime Board on Tuesday, 24th of October 2023 at 10 a.m. My name is Simon Foster and I'm the West Midlands Police and Crime Commissioner, and I'm joined or will be joined this morning by members of the board, the Deputy Chief Constable, Assistant Chief Constable, police officers and staff, and representatives from the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner. We have times attached to the agenda items and I'll be having regard to these in the interest of an effective and efficient meeting and to ensure we complete the meeting within the allocated time. If, of course, people wish to contribute at appropriate time during the course of the meeting, then please raise your hand and I'll bring you into the meeting as soon as I'm able to do so. Before we commence the meeting today, we are all aware of the recent tragic events that have been taking place in Israel and Palestine. I deeply and profoundly regret the devastating, heartrending and tragic loss of all life that has taken place and is continuing to take place. And my thoughts are with everyone who has been affected, including families, friends and communities within the West Midlands. And I understand the anxiety, distress, grief and uncertainty that people are experiencing. Within the past week, I've had an opportunity to meet with members of the Jewish and Muslim communities in the West Midlands, and it's deeply and profoundly important to me that everyone within our Jewish and Muslim communities are safe and secure within the West Midlands. Let us please have a period of silence to show empathy and solidarity with all of the victims and everyone who has been affected. Thank you very much. Agenda item 1 is apologies and Police and Crime Commissioner update, and we have apologies from the Chief Constable and Assistant Police and Crime Commissioner Tom McNeil and Alethea Fuller, Deputy Chief Executive to the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner. Do we have any further apologies to be provided this morning? Don't see anybody indicating, so we'll record those apologies for the purposes of the minutes of the meeting. My Police and Crime Commissioner update this month is as follows. On 13th of October, I attended and spoke at the West Midlands Combined Authority Board and expressed my disappointment that the government's so-called deeper devolution deal had sadly failed to deliver for the people of the West Midlands on crime, community safety and criminal justice. Indeed, it is astonishing to note that crime, community safety and criminal justice did not even make it into the government and the Mayor's top 190 commitments. One can only conclude that crime, community safety and criminal justice are plainly not priorities for the government or the Mayor of the West Midlands. It's therefore all the more ironic and regrettable that the government and the Mayor are persisting with their cynical intention to abolish the right of the people to vote for their Police and Crime Commissioner. I believe in the importance of a democratically elected and directly accountable Police and Crime Commissioner. Last night in the House of Lords, the government and the Mayor supported the abolition of the right of the people to vote and to decide for themselves who they want to represent them as their Police and Crime Commissioner. However, I have challenged the Mayor to have the courage, integrity and principles to put it to the people and let the people decide who they want to represent them as their Police and Crime Commissioner on the 2nd of May 2024. Let it be the people's vote, the people's choice and the people's decision. On the 29th of September, I wrote a detailed open letter to the Home Secretary to respectfully explain to her that here in the West Midlands, I've been calling for and acting on and leading the way on the need to rebuild community policing. And I'm pleased that the government and the Home Secretary are belatedly catching up. Where we lead in the West Midlands, the government follows. I also took the opportunity to remind the Home Secretary of the requests set out in my letter dated 1st of November 2022, in connection with which I am still regrettably awaiting a reply, including the need to return our 800 police officers and the need for fair funding for the West Midlands to enable West Midlands Police to become more effective and efficient at preventing, tackling and reducing crime. It's clear there's to be no levelling up for our police service in the West Midlands. On the 26th of April 2023, I made an application to the Home Office for a special grant with the intention of improving and investing in the ability of West Midlands Police to prevent, tackle and reduce rape and other sexual offences. It's a matter of significant disappointment that the Home Office refused the application on the 4th of September. However, we've not given up, and we are continuing to work with the Home Office on the basis that we might yet achieve a positive outcome. Safer Business Week commenced on the 16th of October, and I was pleased to support it. Abuse, threats and violence towards retail workers is completely unacceptable. It will not be tolerated. It is not and never should be part of the job. And I encourage businesses to report any incidents of abuse and violence towards shop workers and retail crime to the police and provide them with any information that may assist in their investigations. I expect the police to pursue all reasonable lines of inquiry to ensure justice for victims and so that offenders are held to account. However, we must also invest in essential preventative public services such as drug and alcohol treatment services that can prevent abuse, threats and violence towards retail workers and retail crime from happening in the first place. Last week was Hate Crime Awareness Week, and thank you to everyone who has contributed to Hate Crime Awareness Week, whether in action, heart or mind. There is no place for hate crime in the West Midlands. It will not be tolerated, and anyone responsible for hate crime must be held to account. I commission a West Midlands Hate Crime Victim Support Service so that victims of hate crime are able to access the right support in the right place at the right time. I'm pleased to see the continuing improvement in the service provided by West Midlands Police in connection with 999 and 101 calls for service. In 23-24, 91% of 999 calls are being answered within 10 seconds, up from 56% last year. And in 23-24, 67% of 101 calls are being answered within 3 minutes, up from 25% last year. I expect West Midlands Police to continue to drive improvement, both in relation to force contact calls for service and force response to incidents, to ensure that it complies with service level agreements and delivers a service that the people of the West Midlands are entitled to. As the Police Foundation has observed, over 40% of all crime is now fraud, most of which is cyber enabled. October is Cyber Security Awareness Month, and I therefore want to promote the work of the Cyber Resilience Centre for the West Midlands. It is a police-led, not-for-profit partnership aimed at improving cyber resilience in businesses throughout the West Midlands region. The centre exists to better protect businesses, charities and third sector organisations to better protect themselves in the fight against cyber crime. And I'd encourage organisations to check out the advice, guidance and services available from the centre so as to prevent, tackle and reduce cyber crime. And finally, I have convened a conference on the 27th of October to build on my commitment to delivering a West Midlands Police Service that is representative of the people and communities it serves. That is important because it is necessary to ensure we police by consent, build trust and confidence, eliminate any and all discrimination and racism from within the criminal justice system, comply with the public sector equality duty, and because to prevent, tackle and reduce crime, we need a police service that represents the brightest and the best of the West Midlands. And that must include people from our Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities of the West Midlands. My commitment to a police service that is representative of the people and communities it serves is absolute, unconditional and non-negotiable. Agenda item 2 is notes for the last meeting on Tuesday, 26 September 2023. Are there any matters arising from the notes of the last meeting, please? Don't see anybody indicating, so if not, then they are agreed. Agenda item 3 is questions from members of the public. We do not have any questions from members of the public today. Agenda item 4 is questions from members of the board. And we have 4 questions from members of the board, and all 4 questions are from board member Dr. Kath Hannon. So, Dr. Kath Hannon, over to you.
Thank you. Good morning. His Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary and Police and Rescue Services 2022 National Inspection Report about digital forensic services identified 9 recommendations. Can the Chief Constable provide an update on recommendation number 2, which is by December 2023, each force in England and Wales should develop a governance and oversight framework to better understand the local demand for forensic services?
Thank you. I suppose the quick answer is no, the Chief can't because he's not here, but I can on his behalf. So that recommendation number 2 was not issued to the West Midlands Police. And the reason it wasn't was due to the assurance and evidence that we presented during the inspection at the time. So the governance and oversight of our digital forensic footprint is strong, it's well controlled, we've got a lot of data from it, and it's well managed. The demand and output from the digital forensics portfolio is scrutinised by the Assistant Director with clear direction and agreed forecasts. Monthly overall performance is analysed as part of our Forensic Services Service Improvement Meeting, and then all of those outputs are then governed through a crime governance board that ACC Hill chairs. By coincidence, obviously not anticipating this question, that board did a deep dive at the quarterly performance review in August into the data and governance of digital forensics. And then last month at my force performance panel, I did a similar deep dive into it. Suffice to say, at the conclusion of it, I probably won't be bringing it back to the depth force performance data for 6 months because I was so satisfied with the data. So the quick answer is we didn't get that recommendation anyway because we were already built on strong foundations. And I'm really happy that the 3 levels of governance between the Assistant Director, the ACC and me put us in a really strong position around that particular area of business.
Thank you. That's really good news for the force and the leaders in that area of business. So the second question, the Forensic Science Regulator Code of Practice came into force on the 2nd of October of this year. Could you explain what steps the force have taken to ensure compliance with the 34 forensic activities now subject to the statutory regulation, including those deferred until October 2025, related to the sexual assault referral centres and also cell site analysis?
Thank you. So the force have been preparing for this for a decade, which quite frankly is a direct consequence of our Assistant Director of Forensic Service being a proactive member of the NPCC Forensic Quality Board, and therefore our level of compliance is really strong in areas around digital forensics, and I think my first answer is evidence of that. On the 23rd of September, UCAS and the Forensic Science Regulator confirmed that West Midlands Police had successfully transitioned and held accreditation across the new code, and therefore we have complied with the requirements. For those areas that are not compliant, logs been captured that all activity undertaken falls within the 34 defined areas. The overall leadership is ensuring that our compliance is with the log is held by the Assistant Director, and this reported to the Senior Counsel or individual at each quarter review. So really happy with our compliance and accreditation. Specifically then in relation to the 2 other points, SARC and cell site analysis. So our cell site analysis in the West Midlands Police is provided by an external provider. It is not an activity that we at force are therefore required to be compliant with, because we don't provide it ourselves. However, the mapping of cell site analysis results is undertaken by our intelligence analysts, and that will require us to be compliant by 2025. So the analysis is not required, but the mapping is. In order to prepare for that, we've got ongoing and developing relationships between intelligence and forensics, and the Intel team are engaged and as part of the FCR Act requirements. National discussions have commenced, and as I said earlier, our Assistant Director is engaged in those national discussions to ensure that we understand the reason for the addition and what the risks are. We're planning an internal test to ensure that we are consistent and we can produce a mock set of results in any event. In relation to SARCs, West Midlands Region have been working with NHS England and agreed that SARC providers should be the legal entity for the accreditation. We've ensured that the compliance to the FCR Act and codes are included in the technical specification for the contract. And Forensic Services have offered technical quality and specialist science support to the providers who will have the ultimate responsibility for compliance and achieving the accreditation.
So where in cell site analysis, where the requirements of the police have gone to a third party, what's the assurance level then that that third party has achieved the compliance?
So it will be the same thing, which is we'll be commissioning the service and informing those of the accreditation, and we'll need to check and satisfy ourselves that one, it reaches that level of quality, and two, because our compliance will be judged against our mapping, we need to be certain that the data we're getting back allows us to be compliant as well with our aspects of it.
And what's the likelihood of those third parties being involved in your testing or kind of only planning to check with?
Yeah, it's going to have to be, but of course, it's a limited marketplace of those that can provide it. But when we do those mock results, they'll have to form part of that, so that we are certain with a 2-year running that actually we can achieve compliance, and those that provide the service to us can as well.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And the next question is, can you describe the strategic plan to reduce the number of outstanding domestic abuse offenders across the force, which is currently about 1,900?
I can. So the first thing to say is it's not a fixed 1,900. Obviously, it's a rolling number of people that are outstanding for domestic abuse. So just to give you some context, it's currently less than 1,900. It's about 1,700 today. So if I just give you the context of that, 6 months ago, the force had about just under 11,000 outstanding suspects at any one time. Today, around about 9,000, in fact I think we're less than 9,000, so we've taken over 2,000 in the totality of the outstanding suspects, and that's a direct consequence of changing governance, changing our approach to performance management, and of course the new operating model. And then of that 8,000 or 9,000, about 1,700 now are domestic abuse suspects. Of those, 331 are high risk, and 118 are dated earlier than 2023. Those 118 are all circulated as wanted missing, and that's either because there's no address or they're overseas. The reassurance I take from that is what that tells us is that we are dealing with, in effect, today's business today, notwithstanding there's a lag in it, we're actually getting through them. We have moved within the last 2 or 3 months to a dual approach to domestic abuse. So our public protection team now focus on those with the greatest risk associated with them. It's too simplistic to say that they solely deal with the high-risk offenders, because they don't, because they will deal with low-risk offenders where there are aggravating circumstances. But if we sort of take it as a rule of thumb that they will deal with the high risk, the other standard and medium risk domestic abuse suspects then are now dealt with by our local policing teams. So in terms of governance, our public protection unit detective superintendent chairs a domestic abuse operations board that brings together the crime managers, so the DCIs from all of the LPAs and public protection, and that is to identify opportunities to arrest, plan accountability, look at PVPMs, anti-course disposals, and also to put some focus in particular on evidence-led prosecutions, what we used to in the past refer to as victimless prosecutions, again to make sure that we're robustly seeking those opportunities. The board will be aware that in the summer we created a DA desk with dedicated staff from PPU and staff from relevant support agencies that can secure victim statements at the point of call using video technology, which is new and innovative, and we have seen better outcomes from victims of domestic abuse that have been through that process. All of the high-risk DA offenders form part of our daily TRM meeting at each of the LPAs so that they're tracked. So the ownership of high-risk domestic abuse suspects is not owned by one person, it's owned by the chair of the TRM, whether that's the chief inspector or superintendent, so that there is no lag in the plans to tackle and arrest them. And we do get through those at a fairly prompt rate. I guess the proof is in the pudding, though, so I'm telling you all of that. In April of this year, our domestic abuse arrest rate was around 24%. So 24% of domestic abuse offenders were arrested. Today, our arrest rate is just under 40%, which puts us very close to the top of arrest rates for a metropolitan force of our size. And our outcomes, our positive outcomes for 1 to 8 in the outcome framework has gone from 5% to 7.5%. It's not where we want it to be, but it's a significant improvement. So the difficult bit to answer, and the bit that I don't know the answer to, is what is a normal number of outstanding suspects for a force of this size? Some might have said it was 10,000, but I can tell you it's not 10,000 because we're below 9 now, so we've taken that down. Some might have said 1,900 outstanding DA offenders is about normal. Well, it can't be because we're at 1,700 now. So we're continuing that work. I think that we are on a curve, and the rate of drop will start to slow. We will get to a position where we've got a normal amount of outstanding suspects, whether that's DA offenders or others. But through all of our governance processes, particularly those that I chair and those that ACC Hill chairs, we drive the importance of arresting domestic abuse offenders. And I'm satisfied that the risk levels are accurate. What we have done, just to add to our understanding and scrutiny, is so we monitor our compliance with DARA risk assessments. So how many of those are completed, how many have supervisory oversight. But we also monitor the numbers where the victim doesn't comply with answering the questions, and to ensure that we're not inadvertently making it too difficult for the victims to answer the questions in those circumstances. To dive deeper into that data, what we've now started to do is we do a dip sample, we do 10 per LPA of the body-worn video footage of every DA incident. So we pick 10 a month, and we view the totality of the incident that the officers went to, because it's our view that that's the best way to test all of those things that I've said. What does it really feel like when the time's at the target? What does it really feel like when our officers walk in to deal with domestic abuse? We had the feedbacks from that at my last Force Performance Day a month ago, and there is some learning from it, and as a result of that, we're planning some more roll-out training, some more discussion with the front line about the importance of domestic abuse. So I'm satisfied that we are making arrests as promptly as we can. We're arresting at the scene, and that's evidenced by our domestic abuse arrest rate. But we still have got some improvements to do and work to do. But just to reassure the board, it is absolutely front and centre of the improvements the force is making.
Very much. And you've touched on the training. Clearly, the local officers now are picking up business that maybe some of them are not used to working with it. So what kind of training package and support has been provided? So
we've been preparing for that for some time, knowing that this training was coming, to make sure that frontline understand domestic abuse. So using our public protection team led by Caroline Marsh to make sure we roll that out. One of the things that I felt was important is the use of the DVPN's domestic violence protection notices, in particular being the sole preserve of the PPU teams that are dealing with it. Now, of course, we're in that sphere of standard and medium risk. They're more likely than high-risk offences to end up with a DVPN. So actually, I've really pushed the force hard to make sure that that training has gone out as well. And we monitor the use of the DVPNs through the monthly performance board. And we include, so some of those things that I've talked about, so digital forensics, we might bring back in the 6 months. The totality of our DA data suite comes to the DEPS performance board every single month, so we can monitor it, because one, it's really important, but two, it's really important at this point in time, having just gone through that transition, to make sure that it slides.
That's great, thank you very much. And the final question, over a 6-month period, the force recorded that fraud, cybercrime activities were responsible for about £30 million worth of losses. How is the force responding to these types of issues? Part of the response is the recruitment of volunteers. What sort of skills are required, and how will those volunteers be deployed?
Okay, thank you. Our response to cybercrime is multifaceted. We've got a 4P plan in relation to cybercrime. So we operate a robust approach to all of those reports that we receive. We've increased our number of arrests, outcomes and disruptions. We've currently got one full-time member of staff dedicated to supporting victims of cybercrime. And we carry out lots and lots of protect and prevent education events. So recent events at universities with Freshers Week and so on. And of course, as we all know, the usual route in for reporting cybercrime is via national fraud, particularly where there's fraud associated with it, which doesn't always feel like the best service to the victims. What's important is that those referrals that we get into the force, that we then follow up where appropriate to support the victims. And at the start of the meeting, we heard the Commissioner talk about the Cyber Resilience Centre. We continue as a force to encourage local businesses to be in contact with him. So we've currently got 3 adverts out at the moment. We've got one which is a role for us, analytical support. We've got an economic crime victim unit support officer, which again is somebody to provide safeguarding to victims and somebody to support our community engagement events. And I think for all of us, what's required is the ability to engage with people, to ask people to pause and think when particularly dealing with things like text messages, email messages from people who we do interact with. So particularly delivery companies that send us text to say that parcel that you were expecting is not here, click this link, and it's really that ability to engage with people, to get them to think, because all of us probably are expecting for a parcel from somewhere, because it's the way that we all collectively shop now, and it's having that detailed understanding. Really, what I would encourage everybody to do, though, is to, on a business-wide level, continue to engage with the Cyber Resilience Centre. For all of us, when talking to people, to get them to pause and think, particularly in clicking links that they're not certain about. And if they're not sure, go back to Google or any other search engine and actually search for that business and then follow the route in rather than the link that their test sends. And then the final thing for all of us is wherever businesses and particularly charity third sector organisations come to us because they've been a victim of fraud and they've reported it to National Fraud, is bring that to the attention of the force. So the Commissioner brought to my attention at the start of this week a local charity, a local third sector organisation that's been the subject of it. They've done all the right things, they've reported it to National Fraud, they've had that advice, but we're still in a position as a force to send out fraud experts, which we've done in those cases, to make sure that actually we can give better advice, because we can't always guarantee that we'll make arrests and identify suspects, because lots of our frauds are engineered from overseas and overseas certs, and it is complicated. But it doesn't mean to say that we can't take collective steps to support local people and local businesses that are subject to fraud.
The volunteers, the recruitment of volunteers.
So it's ongoing. I think your question was the skill set. I think the skill set is what is really being able to engage with people. It doesn't need to be a detailed understanding of fraud, because it's really complex side of fraud. It's actually encourage people to buy. Well, number one thing being, we need the skill set you need is to encourage people to pause. Don't immediately click the link because you've got a text message that says you've missed a parcel, which is what lots of our personal frauds emanate from.
Thank you very much, Deputy Chief Constable, and thank you, Dr. Caphannon, for those 4 questions. Moving then on to agenda item 5, which is estates strategy. We have 40 minutes allocated to this item, so I'd be grateful if you could please limit your presentation to about 20 minutes. And in terms of presentation, we have Pete Gillett, who is the Director of Commercial Services at Westlands Police, and we also have Andy Kelly, who is Assistant Director of Corporate Asset Management, who are going to be presenting this paper. So please.
Commissioner, thank you. I'm very mindful of the time, and I'll hand over quite quickly to Andy, but just by way of kind of summary, really, in putting the strategic document together in terms of future use of our estates and the review that we've taken place, we've been very mindful of a number of key areas. One, to ensure that our estate properly reflects the operating model that the Chief Constable has introduced, and that we ensure that that really strong focus on communities and localities is reflected within the estate's strategy. Also being very mindful as well that our estate genuinely does deliver the best value for money for the residents within the West Midlands, and the estates and the assets that you hold deliver that purpose. So fit for purpose buildings, but also appropriate financial kind of focus given the wider financial position. And of course, as well, as you've said previously, Commissioner, at different boards, the importance of how the estate contributes towards our sustainability agenda. So very mindful of each of those areas as we have kind of progressed this. So with that very briefest of introductions, I'll hand over to Mr. Kelly. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis. Commissioner, the paper is with everybody now. Just a bit of background, if you may. We've done a number of different strategies over the years. 2012, 2016, where we took some of the low-hanging fruit and got away from a long tail of small buildings. And then we did a comprehensive review published in 2018, which was then reviewed in 2021 after we'd been through COVID and after we'd had the increase in police officers. And you specifically asked whether the 2018 strategy was fit for purpose after those two major events. We've always set out to rationalise and modernise the force estate. The overarching strategy is iterative and it necessarily flexes to allow the policing operating model to flex as well without always having to redesign the estate. The early strategies, as I said, focused on reduction of a small number of expensive long-term leasehold and non-core buildings. And we came out of them because they weren't deemed necessary to support operational delivery. By modernising the estate and being flexible and bringing in agile work styles, we've allowed for a greater occupational density of the building, enabling increased operational resilience and allowing, as I said, the operational needs to flex without always redesigning the building layouts and redesign. This strategy that we're publishing today or recommending to yourself has three main elements. The first is support the new operating model, which the Chief Constable has introduced. The second is to review the alignment with the 11 principles that we published in 2021. And thirdly is to look at the financial context we're now in. So if I focus on supporting the new operating model, basically we provide an estate that allows operational policing to take place, but also mindful of an estate that staff and operational officers can feel pride in and can be safe in. Yes, on the 3rd of April 2023, we moved to a new operating model, introducing 7 local authority levels, local authority areas, LPAs, each under the command of a chief superintendent, and they are now perfectly aligned with the 7 local authorities. In that, Birmingham now becomes 1 LPA instead of 2 as was previously. Now, each LPA commander now has the control of the assets in their area. In that, response, which used to be a separate department, is now part of that LPA. And therefore, we can look at those response locations and how do you better align them with what that local commander wants and needs to give the local people the confidence that the police are there for. And the end state continues to meet its ambitions in a way that will secure a more sustainable and efficient future. We support the maintenance of strong links with local community and deliver a future-proof estate that also seeks to incorporate any green technologies where feasible and affordable. So the paper, I think, points out exactly how it meets the new operating model. And there were some changes in some locations in there where we previously considered that maybe there were surplus to requirements or maybe too expensive or didn't fit the old operating model. But now, as you look at sites like Tipton or like Quinton, what we're suggesting if a person to yourself now is, you know what, in terms of spreading response out to be co-located with the neighbourhood teams, actually those buildings which you currently own probably fit the bill, and with a light touch refurbishment, you can bring them back online and increase the confidence in the local area as well. Alignment with the principles. So the 11 principles are set out in 2021, and we have reviewed all of those with the new operating model and new proposals, and we are aligned with them. There are some slight nuances, some slight changes, but I think that's more in the presentation last time, where in terms of a large custody estate, we were talking about building a new 60-cell custody block on the eastern side of the force. The approach we've taken now is to look at where we have custody cells already that maybe were being held back in reserve, and can we bring them back online without that huge investment. But still, we are aligned with the principles in that neighbourhood teams will be based locally. You will still have 10 public contact officers where the members of the public can actually come forward into one of your buildings and meet police officers. And then thirdly, the financial context. So I read the script. Sustained financial pressures remain a key focus, and the opportunity to create efficiencies within the estate feature as a priority as we reduce revenue spend to protect employee members. fundamentally, if we look at financial year 24-25, we're looking at in excess of a £21 million financial shortfall. So it's inevitably led to a refocus on what our priorities are for investment and what our priorities are for investment in this estate strategy as well, because your estate can consume an awful lot of money, and we need to look at it a little bit cleverer than perhaps we were in the previous strategy. So as I've said, it's proposed that we no longer invest in the 60-cell custody site on the eastern side. It's also proposed that we do not invest in purchasing land and a brand new build for Dudley LPA HQ. In fact, we are very close now to securing an existing building in the same location, which we will slightly modify for the police use, i.e. put a front counter in it, as we said we would, but it's a much reduced investment in that. And when you look at all the refocusing investment, actually what we're suggesting is we need to invest circa £90 million less than the last strategy, which you were going to secure via long-term borrowing. Now, without that £90 million investment, without having to service that borrowing debt, we're actually suggesting that the investment in this strategy can be fully funded by capital receipts, which might just be slightly out of phase of the investment, so maybe some short-term borrowing to bring them back in line, but the capital investment will be from capital receipts. Therefore, I recommend to you the paper as proposed.
Thank you very much. Do we have any comments, questions or matters arising? Yes, board member Buckender Duncan.
Thanks, Commissioner. Yeah, thanks for the report. Read it. There's one thing that keeps playing on my mind with this one, and basically it's Westminster Police have received the 5th worst financial settlement compared to other forces. Okay, it's not getting any better. We've got a huge deficit. How are we going to produce all this? I mean, you've just said there, it's in the report that we need to invest 90 million less compared to previously. This is really difficult. It seems to be getting no help from government, no help whatsoever. How is it all possible?
The investment required will be possible through the capital receipts on disposing of buildings that operationally we no longer require. I cannot speak for central government. I would defer to the Director of Resources on funding opportunities. Peter, if you don't mind.
So yeah, thank you, Andy. So through the Commissioner, yes, of course, you know, we have to be very mindful of, as I said, of the kind of the wider financial situation. I think in doing the review of the buildings the way that we have done, absolutely does give us an ability to create that sustainable capital programme financially. It will absolutely contribute to the future financial savings towards the force's kind of target for next financial year and beyond, with the way that we've looked at revising the capital programme. But obviously the kind of the core function and purpose of this has been to deliver kind of an estate that is fit for purpose, that matches with the localities that we need to serve the public. So yes, it always is a bit of a juggling kind of issue. Later in the agenda, we've got an item on the medium-term financial strategy and the future savings and kind of that position. You know, we've been very mindful of putting this estates plan together in the knowledge of the position of that medium-term financial strategy. So very much kind of mindful of that. Of course, we don't have answers as to what the future financial settlements would look like, but we make the best assumptions that we can within that medium-term financial plan for the future. Perhaps talk about that a little bit more later as well.
If I can just add as well, you know, in the good old days, we would have relied, wouldn't we, on some quite large capital grants from the government to make this sort of investment. That obviously is no longer happening. So what the force and ourselves have crafted is actually a plan which realises the value of existing assets which are no longer required. That's where the capital receipts come from, and invests all of that back into new assets that are more fit for purpose for operational policing. So it's net nil cost, really, if you look at it in that way, but at the same time it will reduce running costs in terms of the revenue budget and savings. And because we're not borrowing, we're not paying high interest amounts in a period of very high rates. So it consumes its own smoke in that sense.
If I may, Commissioner, just come back on that. I totally agree with everything you said there. And believe you me, I totally sympathise and I agree. I think we did a fantastic job with the budget. We were managing it. But it just seems the government are not listening. It's catch-22. On the one hand, they want us to create local public places where people can walk into an office or a front desk. Everybody wants that in an ideal world. Of course we do. But on the other hand, when it comes to budget setting, they're not listening. The budgets are reduced year on year. And how could you every year? You know, I'll use the word it's not fair, maybe compared to leafy areas of the country. But it's difficult. It really is. Thanks, Commissioner.
Thanks very much. Just before we take, just while we're on the issue of financial implications, the issue of financial implications is covered in some detail at paragraphs 100 to 105 in the report. And I just wondered if perhaps you could provide some further detail in connection with the capital receipts, which has been touched upon during the course of the presentation, but also in terms of the impact on backlog maintenance and also the capital investment programme, and also the reduction to revenue expenditure as well, and perhaps just provide some overarching analysis of how they all interact with each other and impact on the plan.
Certainly, Commissioner, yes, effectively, as kind of laid out, you know, hopefully fairly clearly in that financial implications section for readers and for viewers. You know, this this strategy will deliver capital receipts over the period of some £65 million from that disposal programme for those sites that we feel we no longer need operationally. That does enable, therefore, the ability to remove the backlog maintenance that was associated with those sites as well, and that was circa £19 million, which is significant reduction in the commitment required there. So, in addition to the capital receipt cash, we also have a reduced commitment from that position there as well. Obviously, as Andy said specifically as well, you know, because we're also looking at not taking forward a number of schemes of the kind of the major ones that were referred to from both custody and from a Dudley perspective, because we're bringing alternative perspectives forward that are more appropriate for our service delivery, that delivers a reduction in that capital expenditure as well. We expect to see a kind of a one-off reduction of £13 million in revenue costs as well. Backlog maintenance currently estimated to be around £3 million for those remaining sites, Commissioner. We do expect the ongoing reduction to revenue expenditure to be about £6 million, which is a really important contribution to that £21 million saving for next financial year. So very much ensuring that all of those things are reflected and linked into that medium-term financial strategy, but probably even more crucially as we develop the detail and the timelines that sit within those, the detailed budget that we'll be bringing forward for next financial year will of course reflect those changes in there that we will bring assurances on as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think Assistant Police and Crime Commissioner Wazim Ali and then Dr. Kathan and board member.
Hi, thanks for the report, Andy. One of the key things that gets often raised with us is about the public contact officers. I was wondering if you can just give us a quick overview in terms of what that will look like under the new model.
Absolutely. The 2021 paper has a strategy that said you'd have 10 public contact officers, and one in each of the 6 local authority areas, not including Birmingham, and then there were 4 in Birmingham, which one, of course, is in this building itself, in Lloyd House. The new strategy has reviewed that and has stuck to the commitment. There will still be 10 public contact officers throughout the course, 1 in each of the local authority areas and 4 in Birmingham. There will be some changes to the locations. Absolutely have to be. If you look at, for example, Solihull, the Solihull Home Road building costs an absolute fortune to run, is as good as empty, and we need to come out of that building to reduce our exposure to the revenue drain on heating and lighting in such a building, and also the backlog maintenance of that building. It needs an awful lot of work on it. The most financially astute way forward is to dispose of that building, get a large capital receipt to invest in other parts of the estate, and also to invest in frontline officers. So we are continuing to look for a relocation provision for the front counter that's currently in that building. And our commitment is it will stay in the town centre of Salford. Similarly, we will look for a different location for the front counter that's currently in Sutton Coldfield. In that building, again, overly large for our requirements, overly expensive to run, a huge backlog maintenance, because we haven't done backlog maintenance as we went into austerity. We were spending money only on health and safety items, and so the ongoing maintenance of your asset is just building up. It's like having a house at home. If you don't look after the gutters, then the roof starts needing work and that sort of stuff. Yeah, so this stuff is built up over time. So Sutton, we need to come out of. Sutton, you need to have a capital seat to drive other things. So we are looking for a front counter provision in the same locality as the current one is.
Thanks very much, Dr. Campaign.
Thank you. Pete, so eventually we get the property store into Digbeth, and there's a suggestion here that it's going to be relocated when Digbeth moves on. So what sort of challenges will there be with that? So that's the first question. There's talk of a centralised training hub. Is there any kind of plan around what that might look like or how that will be developed? And then the final question is that there's reference about movement from Ladywood and Albury, which is linked to Ridgepoint House, but I didn't quite get the gist of how that was all linked together, so just a little bit of an explanation about that.
Do you mind if I do them in reverse order?
Yeah, sure.
I remember this. Currently operating and kind of on their own now out of Ladywood and Albury are FSIs, Forensic Service Investigators. And because other teams have moved out of there, we have a relocation solution for the neighbourhood teams in Albury. We're going into Jack's Judge House as part of Sandwell Council, and they've moved in already. So we're ready to dispose of the Albury building, which is a drain on resources, isn't fit for purpose, needs far too much work on it. So we're looking to dispose of that building. We need to find somewhere for the FSIs to go. Similarly, in Ladywood, was a large PPU hub, but we've moved all of them now into refurbished Edgbaston, which is a fantastic facility. Reused one of your existing buildings for them, but the FSIs are just hanging on there in Ladywood before we can dispose of that building and drive a capital receipt. So what we're looking to do is coalesce the FSIs back to Ridgepoint House, which is effectively Forensics HQ. But before you do that, you need to move elements like digital forensics out of that building to make space. And we're looking to put digital forensics into Lloyd House here as we consolidate the amount of people who are in this building. We need to intensify the use of this building. So that was the third question. Do you remind me of that?
Apologies, I did miss the second
No,
question.
so the second one was the centralised training hub. If the review on Tally Ho
Yes.
means that it's going to be.
We're looking again at some of your revenue exposure at Cosford and whether you can move that public order training into Tally-Ho, which is effectively training central for Westminster Police. Why can't you do all your training there? And other people come and join us as well. So we're looking at that. We haven't yet finalised our plans, and maybe there'll be some planning implications on that, but that's sort of stuff we're looking at.
So the plan is for potentially Tally-Ho to become a centralised training hub.
Yes.
I've misread that. I thought Tally-Ho would be going and there'd be a centralised training somewhere else.
No, we lease Tally-Ho, so you've always got to be mindful that you might want a different arrangement away from the current landlord. There might be another opportunity coming up, so it is under review, but at the moment we are looking to intensify what goes on there and make that our centralised training hub. And you asked a question, I think, about Digbeth and property stores.
Having finally got it in there, what the challenges will be of finding another location.
Oh, I think we already have. We've moved the property store out of Digbeth a fair while now, centralised it into our logistics centre, and we do a hub and spoke logistics arrangement. If detained property is required for interview or for court, it is moved out from the centre, out to the location where it's required, but then always returned back to the centre. So it is not used as a property store currently.
Thanks very much. Anybody else with any other questions? Okay, well, in the absence of any other questions from anybody else, I just have a few questions. Firstly, I wondered if you could just consider the analysis in relation to force response and existing locations. It's dealt with at paragraphs 15 and 41, I believe, because the strategy that was finalised back in November 21 talked about increasing the number of response hubs from 6 to 8, and the paper before us at paragraphs 15 and paragraph 41 talks about increasing the number of response locations up to 19. And I just wondered if you could provide some further detail in connection with that and how it's envisaged that that is going to work in practice.
Thank you, Commissioner. So a fundamental piece of the new operating model actually breaks that mould of response being a separate department and response potentially sitting in a small number of locations where there might be some neighbourhood teams sat also. The synergies of having neighbourhood policing and response policing co-located and sharing some of those problems is a given that Mr. Guildford really wants this force to pick up. So you had an aspiration in 2021 to eventually get to 6 response hubs, but there was a concern over response times, so that was increased under Mr. Thompson to 8 response hubs. What this operating model does say, no, response is not separate from the neighbourhood control, and in fact co-locating response teams at much more locations than the 8 hubs, and actually have them co-located with neighbourhood teams under the control of the local commander. So that then moves us out from 8 to 19 hubs. We're also looking at maybe potentially a couple more and take you up to maybe 21 hubs.
Thank you very much. My next question is in connection with the theme that is in the paper in relation to improving agile and flexible working practices. So that is dealt with at paragraph 30, where there is reference to the use of more agile technologies and working styles, improving the use by people of desks and utilising the estate more effectively and efficiently. And indeed, at paragraph 44, there's reference to response officers, I believe, and additional investment in laptops for response officers. And again, just wondered if you could perhaps provide us with some more information about those proposed flexible and agile working practices and how it's envisaged that that will work with the estate strategy and improve the service to people and communities in the West Midlands.
Thank you, Commissioner. Mr. Gillett, I will come to you for a bit more information on the investment in agile technology, but if I give you thinking time by answering the... if you have a desk for every person, you need a much bigger estate than you currently have at the moment, and definitely a much bigger estate than we are proposing you have going forward. The desks aren't used by police officers all the time, all the day. If you look at response officers, actually, we want their skills out there doing their response job and maybe coming back to the desk, maybe on shift change and that sort of stuff. So by giving them some agile technology, laptops to be able to be doing their report writing, their catching up on investigations they need to be looking at out on the road, in touchdown areas, not always having to come back to the base, then we can utilise that desk for other stuff. So you start looking at desk sharing, and we have numbers of desks per officer, per shift. We have logarithms that look at all of that and work out how much of the estate you need. Other teams have different requirements for desks, but tethering somebody to a desk is only really needed if they're tethered to a specialist computer. If it's a shared computing function, if it can be done with laptops where actually you don't need to be tethered to a desk, then you can start using that desk an awful lot more creatively for people. I would be looking at, for some of your more office-based functions, to be having a desk booking system, much like you have room booking systems where you book a room for whatever your functions are. If you could book desks in a touchdown area, then you could utilise your state much more efficiently. And that's the sort of stuff we're looking at. But I know Mr. Gillett has invested in agile technology for response.
Thank you, Andy. So yes, Commissioner, I think Andy's kind of covered the kind of key aspects of where we are. But we are in the middle of a rollout program of laptops to our operational offices. We're doing it LPA by LPA. We've completed Birmingham. We've got to Coventry, have a rollout plan. I can provide the board perhaps with an update, written update in terms of how that plan is going and the timelines associated with it, Commissioner, but very pleased with the way that that's progressing. Of course, we also have, in addition to laptops, we have a really strong approach to using kind of mobile technology, smartphones for officers and staff, have a kind of a greater number of apps, I think, available to our officers than the vast majority of other forces do, to enable us to do business kind of through that more agile way, and we'll continue to develop that. I think we're being recognised as a really strong national centre of excellence for our approach to our mobility. We'll obviously continue to build on that and actually absolutely making sure we're making those right synergies between laptop provision, kind of handsets and desktop as well. All of that helps, of course, with the way that Andy's described, bringing together that greater kind of ability to have a higher density level kind of within our offices and to drive those better value for money areas as well.
Thank you very much. Another thing that is set out in the paper is in connection with those locations that it's going to be necessary to move to a disposal. There's often a commitment to not disposing of that location until a suitable alternative police base has been identified within the local area, local community. Now, that commitment has been long-standing, and there have been some expressions of frustration in particular areas of the West Midlands where, for various reasons, it's not been able to fulfil that commitment, notwithstanding that the commitment remains. I give, just by way of example, Stourbridge. The efforts to obtain an suitable alternative police base for the local neighbourhood policing team that has been ongoing for quite some time. And I just wondered if you could perhaps provide some further information about why the delay sometimes happens in terms of being able to locate and identify those suitable alternative bases, but also take the opportunity to recommit to that principle which is set out in the paper.
So Stourbridge, as the example you raised, Commissioner, firstly, Stourbridge is policed. Absolutely, neighbourhood teams police there, and lie. They may start their shift and they finish their shift in a different building currently, because we haven't got a police base in Stourbridge, but we continue to look for one. I wouldn't say false dawns, but there have been many opportunities that we have investigated thoroughly that have either proven themselves to be unsuitable in terms of fully maintaining a lease on a heritage building, which would have exposed you to financial burden that we couldn't really accept. In other cases, the actual lease as set out by the landlord proved to be far too expensive to even consider. So we are looking, we know how much it should cost to house a neighbourhood team, so we're looking for locations that come within that cost envelope. There are a couple that are looking really good at the moment, and we hope to be able to propose and recommend to you in the near future for you to make a decision on those.
Thank you very much. You touched upon during the course of the presentation in connection with the long-standing commitments in relation to Solihull and Sutton Coldfield, and they remain unchanged in terms of those basic principles in relation to the police buildings in those two locations. But one area which is also not dissimilarly affected is that of Chelmsley Wood Police Station, and I just wondered if you could perhaps specifically talk about the plans in relation to Chelmsley Wood and why those plans are as they are at the moment.
So Chelmsley Wood houses a couple of neighbourhood teams. It houses an element of response and the new operating model where Solihull response is spread across 3 locations. It doesn't have a front counter. It's a building that's in a good location. It's far too big for our needs. It needs quite a bit of work. But in 2018, we had a proposal that we were looking to invest in the current building. Basically make it as open plan as possible and move more and more teams into that. Under the Solihull Metropolitan Borough Council Master Plan for Chelmslie Wood, they have a redevelopment of Chelmslie Wood, of which our site is in their first phase of complete redevelopment. They would wish to convert that area to, I think it's residential, affordable housing, but maybe also a supermarket offering in that area. Our building and our access to the building would need to be given up for them to allow that to go. So we're in discussions with the council about re-providing us with a police base in that local area, in Chelmslie Wood. So those discussions are ongoing with the council. A number of sites have been looked at. They have their own business requirements for their portfolio of estate, but there is a general understanding that if they want to develop our current site, they need to be able to provide us with an alternative. So those conversations are ongoing.
Thanks very much. Another police station that will be of interest, I'm sure, to people will be the plans in relation to Coventry Central Police Station. And I just wondered if you could perhaps take the opportunity to outline those in some further detail as far as that particular station is concerned, please.
Coventry Central is in dire need of investment. The site. I just had a little look at the current operating revenue drain is nearly £780,000 per annum. It has a cell block on the site, which actually we could have a better provision at our Willenhall Chase Avenue, also in Coventry. We operate response out of there, but moving to a more localised response model where we spread it amongst 3 sites in Coventry, then having a large response hub in Coventry Central is no longer required. We have neighbourhood teams in there, which will need to be found locally provisioned, and we have a front counter. The site itself is potentially worth an awful lot of capital, which you could reinvest in the rest of the strategy and not have that huge drain on borrowing. So what we are proposing to do is move response to Canley, Close Hill, and Willenhall Chase Avenue as well. We are looking to re-provide for the neighbourhood teams locally, and we're very close to finding a solution for the front counter, which will absolutely be in the same location. That will then, and as I said, the custody will be at Willenhall Chase Avenue. That will then allow us to propose to you that we dispose of the site and hopefully gain a large capital receipt which we can reinvest in the rest of the programme. Okay. It's either that or you have to invest in the current building because it is in terrible state of repair.
Thanks very much. Another key theme in the paper which is identified is the need to deliver a greener estate and of course a sustainable estate. And there is some details that are set out in relation to that objective and that desired outcome, both in terms of energy efficiency and energy resilience. And I just wondered if you could perhaps provide some further information, not only in relation to what is planned in this paper, but also the action that has been taken in order to deliver around that key theme in recent times, since Westminster Police launched its environmental strategy last year.
Thank you, Commissioner. I believe there is an update on the environmental and sustainability strategy at your next strategic Crime Board, but so not to steal the thunder from that, but what I can say is where it is affordable, we are investing in greener technologies. We've all got to look at the payback period, and for a public sector who potentially can buy energy cheaper than you or I in our domestic environment, the payback periods for us might be a lot longer, therefore, than others in the private sector might see. But again, we will look at it. When I say affordable, a lot of people might say, or many of your buildings could have PV on the roof, photovoltaic cells on the roof. But what we would have to do is look at the roof loading of that, and how much extra wind pressure does such a PV cell on the roof generate, and therefore can the roof take it? So it's not just buying some cells, it's actually, oh, do I have to now strengthen the roof? So that's why we look at the whole cost balance of these initiatives. Where possible, we have taken SALIX grants from the government to look at where we can invest in green technology. But actually, what we're finding is some of our more cost-effective approaches are actually better insulation in some of the existing buildings we've got, in some of the refurbs we're looking at. That gives you a much better rate of return for your investment, and stop the energy leaking out rather than having the greenest technology available, which might be cost prohibitive.
Thanks very much. Got any more questions, comments, matters arising from that report? Don't see anybody else indicating. So, firstly, thank you so much, Pete and Andy and Amy, for coming along and presenting your report and for answering our questions. It's much appreciated. Thank you. Sadly, for the past 13 years, we've had a government that does not believe in and has not been prepared to invest in local community police stations, and that's why well over 600 police stations are closed across the country. When I was elected, I pledged to rebuild community policing, and I'm pleased that we're able to announce a range of new, retained and refurbished police buildings as part of this estate's strategy. This investment will ensure a police estate that is fit for the 21st century, and the plan places significant importance on community policing and police officers working in local communities to prevent, tackle and reduce crime, to keep people, families, businesses and the local community safe and secure. Police stations are important because they provide a reassuring and visible presence for communities, and this plan will ensure the region retains as many as possible whilst prioritising maintaining police officer numbers and managing a budget that remains under severe pressure. 10 public contact officers will be kept in place across the region, and the new police estate will strive to be greener and more sustainable than ever, and I wholeheartedly support that. Thank you very much. Agenda item 6 is medium-term financial plan. This agenda item is to be presented by Chief Finance Officer Jane Heppel of the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner and Davinder Jagpal, Assistant Director of Finance, West Midlands Police. And we're asking that the presentation please be kept to no more than about 10 minutes on the basis that we've all had an opportunity to read the paper and it's available to members of the public, and so as to maximise the opportunity for any questions and discussion following conclusion of the presentation. So, Jane, I think you're going to start.
I am. Thank you, Commissioner. So the Medium-Term Financial Plan, or MTFP, presents a picture at a point in time, but this is a good time as we've just reviewed the estate strategy as we've heard this morning. And of course, estates costs are a large part of the non-pay element of the revenue budget and of the capital programme. So this iteration does include the impact of the estate strategy just presented and the lower borrowing costs that it brings, which is particularly welcome in a period of high interest rates. It also includes the reserve strategy, which is the plan for how we will use, retain, and sometimes indeed grow our earmarked reserves, which meet particular risks that we know about in the future. The reserve strategy must be published on the OPCC website as a public document and is an important part of proving the financial resilience of the organisation. Section 33 of this paper shows the read across of the use and increase of the capital receipts reserves, which supports that investment in estates that we've spoken about this morning. It should be noted, though, that a capital receipts programme, which you're relying on in order to fund that investment, needs careful management. as the use and timing of receipts brings risks to the programme if the receipts are not achieved on time. However, overall, it is true to say that by the end of this plan, reserves are predicted to have grown slightly. An NTFP is an expression of the situation an organisation finds itself in and how it can best respond. It describes external and internal challenges, such as contractual pressures and the Chief's operational demands, and sets them in the context of the external funding available. This gives us overall a picture of the need to find a further £21 million of savings in 24-25, and point 36 in the paper covers the areas that will be explored in order to close that gap. Whilst the stretch of the plan shows the need to find savings, in reality, this is off a baseline that's far from ideal. If we were to cost up the ideal police force, it is likely we would end up with a very different budget than the one we are presenting. And West Midlands cost per crime and per head of population are at the very lowest end of the spectrum. If you divide the West Midlands net revenue budget by the number of crimes in the area for 23-24, that gives us a net funding of £1,902 per crime. On the same measure, Surrey receives £3,870, so double. Most of our funding still comes from the police main grant, unlike many other forces where a strong council tax base has allowed council tax rises to protect spending. The formula funding review is now very unlikely within this parliamentary term, which means that we will continue to need to find cost savings into the medium term. And the Home Office have confirmed as well they expect constrained financial pictures to continue, with limited increases expected to the Home Office overall funding. This MTFP assumes a £10 rise in council tax in 2024-25. However, the PCC has confirmed he would consider a higher level of precept were he allowed to do so. However, even an extra £5 per year over the £10, so £15 in total, would only raise about a third of the amount required in savings for next year. A budget consultation will be sent out in due course, and we will hold a business consultation in January, which will give us an opportunity to consult widely with the public. I'll pass you over now to Devinder Jagpal, who's the Assistant Director of Finance, Contracts and Procurement, to highlight any items she wishes to particularly bring to your attention in the paper.
Thank you. So you're probably aware the MTFP is reviewed periodically and it builds up each year on previous information. The numbers we present to you today are based on the information we know now and the assumptions that we've made within the document. Section 8 to 11 takes you through those assumptions, which are sometimes a moving beast. So we've obviously played through the assumptions that we've made today into Table 12. So Table 12 provides you the forecast in terms of the potential funding gap going forwards, which Jane touched on, with next year looking at potential funding of 20.7 million. We have a plan on how we're going to manage that gap, which is a mix of utilising the underspend which we've generated this year, and by creating a bit of headroom there, but also by going through our usual PVV savings exercise, which is a well-rehearsed exercise for us because we've been doing that ever since I've joined the force, and we've managed to deliver some permanent savings through that exercise. So fairly confident that we can do that to manage the gap for next year. Sections 21 takes you through the capital programme. The reason I point that out is because there are revenue implications from the capital programme, which will put that additional pressure and cost onto the revenue budget. That's played through in Table 21 and includes, as again Jane touched on, the most updated estate strategy. I mean, overall the estate strategy has reduced significantly from the previous version, so that has given us has relieved the pressure slightly on the revenue budget. The majority of the estates programme is funded through borrowing or capital receipts. Again, you'll see in section 26 the estate strategy, and hopefully those numbers are familiar to you from the earlier paper that you've seen, which shows the capital costs of 45.8 million and how that's funded. There are some one-off revenue costs which are funded, as I said, from the revenue budget. Section 30 onwards talks about the reserve strategy. It gives you, it sets out the use of the reserves in each of the different areas, but also sets out the forecasted balances for each of the reserves. We touched on earlier the budget, the use of the budget reserves. So sort of halfway, 3/4 of the way down the table, you can see the movement on the budget reserve, which reflects the use of that reserve for plugging the gap next year. So where you see that movement of 16.2 to 26.7, that takes into account the underspend generated this year, but also the use of the reserve next year as well. Section 36 talks about the different options and levers available going forwards to try and alleviate some of the pressures. We continue to explore those throughout the budget setting process, and some of those will play through when the budget is set for 24-25. Those were the only areas I was going to really draw out, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks very much. Do we have any comments, questions or matters arising? Yes, Hannah.
Thank you both. So paragraph 8 refers to the government wanting 10 million cashflow savings, cashflow efficiency savings from policing. I take it that's a national figure. In which case, what proportion of that would be from West Midlands Police? And then paragraph 15 refers to savings across non-pay expenditure and a review of vacant posts across police staff establishments. What does non-pay expenditure actually refer to? And in that review, if vacant posts aren't going to be filled, who will do the work that is associated with those posts? And then the last question is about table 21, IT infrastructure. There's a bit of a roller coaster there of spends, which goes from 3.2, 2.6, 3.3, then 5.7, and then 3.3. So there's a bit of a roller coaster. Just sort of understanding what that means. Thank you.
Start with 100 million. Sorry. Shall I start with 100 million? Yeah, the 100 million is a national figure, and it was part of the comprehensive spending review settlement, which is almost 3 years old now. The government was quite clear that they expected efficiency savings to be reported back to them. So Blue Light Commercial collect that information on behalf of all police forces. I guess our percentage of that would be equivalent with our net revenue expenditure, so we'd be 15%. So that, yeah, it's about 15 million. So on the more detailed items, I'll hand over to my colleagues.
Right. So I think, thank you, Commissioner Cathcart, kind of referred to the kind of the headroom, the planned headroom that we're creating in the current year, and kind of the impact that has, kind of those non-pay budgets. So effectively, you know, earlier in the meeting, we talked about the estate strategy. All of those estates costs are what we would define as non-pay costs. The contracts that we have with third-party suppliers, very much non-pay. We wish to continue to challenge to get the best efficiencies that we can out of our suppliers that are kind of providing services into us. That's particularly relevant for a number of the IT costs. So perhaps pick up the IT kind of, you know, as you described it, roller coaster there. What that is a genuine reflection of the different pinch points where we need to invest in some of our replacement kit and some of our kind of implementation of the Synergy IT strategy. So rather than just say we need X million pounds per year for this, we try to be really smart, perhaps in terms of kind of the way that we've looked at the IT strategy and where those key investment points need to take place. So that's kind of that piece around there. I think specifically as well, you talked about the kind of the impact of savings, that headroom that would be sort of nearly £11 million headroom that we're creating in the current year through the planned staff vacancy management approach that we have. I think it's really important, first of all, to say that the approach we're taking there is very much to protect frontline services. So wherever possible, we will ensure that we make those savings in those non-pay areas first, then when we look at kind of where other savings would come from, ideally kind of protecting that front line means that we then look at things like enabling services within my world. So many of those police staff savings that we've talked about are in HR, in finance, and so on and so forth, IT. And we have to be very mindful of the point you make that, of course, there is work that still needs to be done. So we're carrying out a whole series of different reviews at the moment. So we've done a lot of review work within IT, specifically around the synergy strategy and the resources required to deliver that. We're doing some review work at the moment within HR, external kind of view in terms of kind of what a future HR service would look like. So we're doing that with a view to have a very planned approach to how we deliver that work. So we're not just expecting everything to be picked up by kind of those that are kind of left, that we do that in a very kind of managed way. And we'll continue to do that and bring those updates through our budget monitoring reports to the board as well as to how we're delivering against those budget savings. What I would say is we do have, as Davinder said, a really good track record of delivering savings. You know, we still have a budget for next financial year in excess of £700 million within which to deliver our services. Yes, of course, we've got savings to make against that. But given we've got quite a strong approach in terms of the priority-based budget methodology that Davinder referred to, the way that we are creating headroom this year should give us that ability to deliver despite the challenge that we have there. So I think that's really important to flag that way as well. I think the other thing I draw out on that is when we bring the detailed kind of budget proposals forward, as Jane referred to, we will again take the opportunity to ask for an independent third-party review of our financial assumptions. So last financial year, well, the current financial year, we used the Chartered Institute of Public Finance and Accountancy to carry out a review of the assumptions that sit within these financial plans, particularly the work on the kind of the annual budget, to give us a kind of view as to, yeah, actually we think you're right there, you're on target with what you're doing, and we'll continue to adopt that approach as we go forward. That's increasingly being seen as really good practice, that we get somebody externally having that kind of, you know, objective view as to what our financial plans look like. So we'll continue to do that. So hopefully, Kath, kind of picking up kind of various bits that's answered your
Sure.
questions.
Just regarding Blue Light Commercial, then, if they're the collectors of the information around savings, I guess is that publicly available, and I guess there's a sharing of what that is, so people can learn from how each force makes those savings.
So we submit our savings information into Blue Light Commercial, but they collate that from all 43 forces and they relay that back to us. They issue individual statements to each of the forces, but that's also available for other forces to view as well.
So how do you know it's fair for, you know, that West Midlands Police isn't making, you know, excessive savings compared to the other forces who are making very little?
Well, I think we've got the visibility so we can see proportionately how each force is delivering against the kind of their targets. I have to say, though, that if there's a procurement saving or an efficiency that we can make, we should make it, because that's a reduction in third-party expenditure primarily that, again, protects those frontline services we've been talking about. So I wouldn't be particularly hung up from my perspective on if we proportionately are delivering a higher level of kind of that procurement saving, because if we can deliver a procurement saving, we should do. So, yeah.
That's great. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Kath. Board member Pendergast.
Thank you, Commissioner. It's just an observation really that I wanted to make. I mean, the figures what you quoted and from the report, it seems you're doing a really, really good job. You're doing everything, you're putting out all the stops. But it seems to me, I mean, I'm sorry I maybe repeat myself, but we've got a government here that's just living in cloud cuckoo land. They're not working with you, they're not talking to you, there's no engagement. I mean, Jane, you just gave some figures there about compared financial figures compared to Surrey per crime to West Mids. They're receiving virtually double. I mean, we talk about levelling up. There's no levelling up there. There's no fairness in funding there. It's absolutely stupid what the government are doing. It sounds on paper, yes, when you look at our financial settlement, but when you look at the costs we've got and the rising costs, insurance costs that are rising all the time, they're not getting any cheaper. We've got other costs that are rising all the time. I'll give you an example of petrol. I mean, the cheapest place I bought diesel a couple of about 2 months ago was £1.30 a litre. a gallon, is it? I can't remember now. But it's now shot to 152. That's 20 pence increase, but yet the government are telling us, oh no, the cost of living is going down, it's getting better, inflation's getting lower. It's not getting any better at all. But no, I've read the report and I was reading it and shaking my head. It just makes me so angry. I think what we need here, if you can, Commissioner, is get a government minister here. That's what we need. I would really, really like that. Thank you. Sorry.
Thanks, Bhupinder. I think Chief Executive John Dean.
Yes, well, I mean, partly I would follow up on Bhupinder's point about the assumptions related to inflation and pay pressure. On what are they based and how reasonable are they? I guess also I would welcome commentary on the level of risk to which we're exposed as a result of the grant-based approaches to funding police officer numbers. So rather than it be part of the main grant, these are bespoke funding streams. So what risks come with that approach? And then finally, I mean, any kind of assessment of the extent to which the MTFP has risk in it as a result of one element of it being fixed, that being police officer numbers. So if police officer numbers cannot be changed, what pressures is that creating elsewhere in the MTFP that are worth noting and highlighting for our assessment of the level of risk that we face?
Thank you. Perhaps, Jonathan, if I may, Commissioner, just come to the latter point that you made around kind of that ring fencing effectively of funding for police officers. That is a really important issue, and it's one that we have to be incredibly mindful of with these financial planning processes. So absolutely, we've delivered successfully and exceeded our requirements of the police officer uplift. Very welcome additional numbers for the force, funding associated with that also very welcome. But it is absolutely clear that that is currently a ring-fenced level of funding to maintain those numbers. That means that when we look at the £21 million worth of saving, we of course have to ring-fence the police officer numbers away and proportionately then look at where we make the savings in the rest of the organisation. I think in the current year's budget report and certainly in next year's budget report, we'll be absolutely continuing to flag that remains an issue. Sorry.
One thing on that. Okay, so I was at a conference last week, which was the APCC and PACS, and it was a very interesting comment that was made that, Commissioner, you cannot tell the Chief Constable, the Deputy Chief Constable, how to blend our operational mix. But by direct grant funding and linking that to officer headcount, that is exactly what the Home Secretary has done. And not all forces would have more officers. Some of the forces in the room, or the PCCs represented in the room, were saying that actually they now have more officers than they feel they would like. And so some forces' hands are being tied with a mix which they think not in favour of police staff as much as they would like, and some forces like ourselves are still under those levels that we would like to historically climb back up to. So it's a very interesting picture there of how that direct funding has impacted on decision making locally. Sorry.
Thank you, that's really helpful. Jonathan, and I'm sure Devinder will come in on this as well, but you also talked about the kind of the approach that we take with pay awards and recognising the increases there. We've tried wherever possible to use as much intel from our conversations with the Home Office, from kind of national bodies and so on as to what we look like. We have, where possible to date, been a little bit prudent kind of with that. So for example, within the current year, we tried to make sure that we were kind of budgeting as kind of at the higher level that we thought, that we could do. So that when the grant funding actually did come in, actually that put us in a slightly more favourable position than our financial plans had originally indicated. We'll continue to do that, but perhaps Devinder, you could just share the approach that we take when we put those together.
The biggest drive of the increase in costs has obviously been general inflation and pay award inflation as well. We continue to monitor market information on general price inflation. With regards to pay inflation, we work very closely with all the authorities to make sure that our assumptions are sensible. We did actually have sit for review our assumptions last year, and the actuals have actually come in quite close to what we forecasted in terms of funding gaps year on year. So I'm fairly confident that the judgments that we're placing on the assumptions are reasonable and have actually played through when we've arrived at the year in question. And with regards to utilities, we work quite closely with Crown Commercial Services, who are our providers. They run regular sessions with regards to what's happening in the utilities arena, and we play that through. And as I said at the outset, I mean, the MTFP is a document which we're constantly updating and reflecting any sort of new market information that we get.
Thanks very much. I think in view of time, we will need to draw this agenda item to a close. So thank you very much, Pete, Govinda and Jane, for coming along and presenting the report and answering our questions. Much appreciated. The West Midlands Police budget remains under severe pressure. The brutal and harsh reality is that the police funding settlement from central government does not maintain the baseline funding that West Midlands Police needs to operate on a day-to-day basis to deliver an effective and efficient police service. We continue to have a police funding formula that costs West Midlands Police £40 million a year, the equivalent of 800 police officers, because for the past 8 years the government has proved itself to be incapable of organising itself to reform it. Notwithstanding, the funding formula is universally acknowledged to be unfit for purpose. People are having to pay more local council tax for less local policing. West Midlands Police received the 5th worst percentage 23-24 financial settlement in the country, faced £28 million of cuts in 23-24 and faces a further £21 million of cuts in 24-25. That's not fair, it's not just, and it's not right. And I'll continue to call on government to provide fair funding for West Midlands Police. In the meantime, I'll do all I can to ensure an effective and efficient police service for the people of the West Midlands within the resources that are available. Agenda item 7 is update on Operation Fairstay Data Wash. And this is the public agenda item to be presented by Chief Superintendent Sam Ridding. And we're asking that the presentation please be kept to about 5 minutes or so, on the assumption that board members have had an opportunity to read the papers. They're available to members of the public to read, and also to maximise the opportunity for questions and discussion of issues arising out of the report. So, Chief Superintendent, with directly, please present the report.
Thank you, Commissioner. Good morning to everyone. So, Operation Fairstay, following the conviction of David Carrick, as we know, a serving Metropolitan Police officer who was convicted of heinous crimes in January 2023, the National Police Chiefs Council announced that all forces would wash their data, so police staff, officers and volunteers, through the Police National Database, and that became known as the Historical Data Wash. So in West Midlands, we adopted an operation name to enable this to take place, and that was Operation Fairstay, and that was led by myself. So the NPCC, the Chiefs Council, set timescales within which they wanted us to work in order to reassure our communities that we've done everything we can to check our staff and ensure that no other forces could be in a position where they had an individual like David Carrick working within their organisations. So those timescales involved ensuring that our staff data, names, addresses, dates of birth, was all up to date, and that was shared with the national team. There was then a date at the end of March when that data was returned to us, having been washed through the system, and a number of lines of data returned for us to check. And then the requirement was for us to have examined and put in place a risk management plan as required by the end of September 2023. So that work is all completed. West Midlands Police were able to complete that work by July of this year. And that information and data will all be subject to a national report which is due for publication in January 2024. So my findings here will be headline findings only. So as detailed, we set up a small team. These were staff that were already appropriately vetted. They were staff that were used to working with the Police National Database, And we also undertook additional checks, ensuring that from a professional standards position, they had no ongoing investigations or matters, or actually had any matters that would cause us concern. All officers and staff involved in doing the check-in signed a confidentiality agreement at the start of every day, reminding them of the data that they may see and what they were to do with that. So we worked through the data, and as we progressed through the data, any findings were fed into professional standards immediately. So we didn't wait until the end of July to do that. We are one of the first forces to finish the return, and I think that's due to the number of people, 10 individuals that we put into the data wash. I was really keen that we did it as quickly as possible because I didn't want those that we hadn't checked at the start to become an issue at the end. There were not large and significant concerns raised, fortunately. There were matters that we didn't already know about as an organisation that we did find, and quite clearly any matters that we didn't know about and should have known about are a concern, and they are being managed. We created extra time by finishing early compared to the deadline set nationally, so we then undertook further reassurance checks on our own data to reassure ourselves that we were in a strong position. So that included those individuals that hadn't been vetted within the last 5 years. Individuals that hold recruitment vetting should be checked every 10 years, those with management vetting every 7. So we checked everyone that hadn't been vetted within 5 years. We also checked anyone that was subject to a current live misconduct investigation. And we also checked all of our colleagues that are suspended from the workplace currently. That provided me, and in order to provide the Deputy Chief Constable, additional reassurance that we'd done everything we could with the data that we'd received to check there was no one of concern within our organisation that we didn't know about. As a result of the data wash and working through the data, we set up a very small integrity unit in professional standards, working with professional standards staff and staff in the counter-corruption unit to manage the referrals from FASD and to commence reviewing all historical information held against our staff. That work is ongoing, and as a result of that work, we have identified some matters of concern which are being managed through our risk management processes in the service confidence meeting. We have asked for further PND data dumps, so we have asked for the information that wasn't supplied to us after March to be resupplied to us. Nationally, they're not in a position to do that. They are working through some technical issues with the PND due to the volume of requests that they're getting. Recommendation 16 of the HMIC FRS inspection in November of last year asked that all forces do a monthly check on the Police National Database with their staff. That can't be in place yet while they're waiting for that national solution. What we have been able to do within our organisation is use the data from our Connect system, so our custody records, our intelligence records and our crime records, to create a daily dashboard which has gone through the ethics committee, so that that data, individuals arrested in West Midlands police area where there may be intelligence, can be examined on a daily basis. So actually I think we're in a position where the information known to West Midlands police area will be managed more quickly than anything the PND will give us in the future. Notwithstanding, that doesn't give us information for individuals that may have intelligence relating to other force areas or arrests out of the force area. But as an interim position, I think we're in a really strong position. The team has now been disbanded as the work has been sucked into professional standards as business as usual, but the integrity work continues and will be subject to a request to establish that as a permanent structure moving forward for professional standards. That is the headlines that I wanted to share with you today, Commissioner and Board, unless there's anything else that you would like to add.
Thank you very much. You've got any comments, questions, matter rising? Yes, Bhupinder Garkal and then Kathleen.
Thank you, Commissioner. Yeah, it's a really detailed report, so it's welcome. And it shows that obviously West Midlands Police really do take this seriously. You may have answered it, I'm sorry, I switched off for a minute and I do apologise, just concentrating on something else. You say that there's recommendations about there should be some sort of monthly check, which
Yes,
which is,
recommendation 16.
yeah, which is in the real world is going to be very difficult to do a check every month. But is there something in place, or will there be something in place for a yearly check, a couple of years check? What I'm getting at is if we've got somebody, me for instance, I joined the force, impeccable record, I've gone through all the checks, perfect. But 2 or 3 years on the line, get involved in something outside of West Midlands and it's not flagged up, something like that. Is it something that you can reassure us that every 2 or 3 years everybody will be checked again?
So if the Police National Database can get over the technical issues, and I believe they absolutely will, we should get every month our data automatically checked and that data shared with us. That is definitely the best option. In the interim, obviously, we've got the daily checks using our own data, which flags that information up to us. One of the other recommendations in the inspection from November last year is that recruitment vetting is not checked every 10 years, that goes down to 5 years, and management vetting, which is currently a check at every 7 years, gets reduced. That's notwithstanding that if anyone is subject to a misconduct investigation, if anyone is subject to a misconduct outcome, in line with the vetting approved practice, we will automatically review their vetting status and check the information that is held against us. On occasions, there may be anonymous information that comes in against an individual, and we will also review it in that position as well. So there's a number of checks and balances, and I've mentioned the service confidence meeting. That information that may cause us a concern is subject to scrutiny in that meeting and subject to a risk management plan, which can include a number of matters, which may include an interview with the individual themselves. Sometimes information is submitted that's malicious. An interview with them and their supervisor to help them understand why they may be vulnerable to the information that we're aware of. So there's a number of checks and balances in place. I think the best will be that we get that monthly information from the Police National Database. And I would be surprised if there weren't months in the future where we actually don't have any hits across that because of some of the processes we've already got in place.
Thanks very much, Kath-Helen.
Okay. A couple of questions here. Are we satisfied that the current recruitment and vetting processes are sufficient to identify undesirables people applying for the police? Secondly, there's a reference to victim data, the use of victim data. Could you explain the issues there and the compromise for an individual who'd like to privacy? And then the last question is about disproportionality. That kind of resurfaces every now and again, but what's being done internally to manage that issue?
Okay, thank you. So current recruitment and vetting, so I would suggest we are exceptionally robust. There's no place for us to carry any risk within the organisation that we don't need to. There are definitely processes that make it easier to refuse applicants in the first place than then manage individuals that have got within the organisation. We've recently undergone some changes in the department in terms of a new chief inspector and inspector, and they are reviewing everything we have in place. I suspect that will make it absolutely cast iron and robust, but I have no concerns about the vetting position that we're in at the moment. In relation to your victim data, so what the Police National Database holds is information that relates to crimes that may not be a suspect of an offence as an officer or police staff. That may be that an individual was a victim. So, for example, I don't live in the Force area. I've been a victim of a burglary at home. That data would have been flagged. In order to make sure we didn't intrude in that right to privacy, we were able to put some filters on the level of victims that people were. If it showed that it was robbery, burglary, vehicle crime, some of the crime that unfortunately a lot of people will become a victim of, we excluded that immediately. One of the concerns of the Ethics Committee in the approach that we've now taken was managing that victim data, and what we're able to do is automatically filter that victim data out. So whilst it does exist, we can exclude it straight away. In the cases where a victim had been a victim of a crime such as a domestic assault or a serious sexual allegation, Clearly, what will always be attached to that is a criminal investigation with an officer in charge of that investigation. So in those instances, we ensured that they had the right level of victim support through those processes, on occasion ISVAs and IDVAs, and reassured ourselves of that. We've asked Yvonne Bruton, who was leading on the victim policy, to just make sure that the offer for our staff is available for everybody, that they're able to access the victim support that's provided by the MPC's office via our third sector providers. Apologies. But as much as possible, we're not ignoring the data, but we're able to exclude the data that we don't need to look at. Disproportionality. So what we were really keen to do was to ensure that the information that we did collate, we examined for any themes, any concerns, and in line with all of the data that we collate in professional standards, we did see that there was some disproportionality in the information that we received. With all of the disproportionality data that we collate across our department, which includes vetting refusals, vetting appeals, the complaints against officers, the data of the complainants where we have it, those that are subject to misconduct investigation, those that are subject to anonymous reporting. We collate that data, we examine it in detail, we try and understand if there are issues that we believe need exploring, and we also have a disproportionality focus group with all of our internal stakeholders, so our colleagues from the Police Federation, Women in Policing, AMP, BAPA attend, and with them we examine the data and seek to understand and then look at the solutions to that. The reality is there is disproportionate reporting into professional standards, which then finds its way through the whole of the process. The outcomes aren't disproportionate, but the information that starts at the beginning is. So we do a lot of work with it. We're working with Staffordshire University on some academic research to help understand, and some initial findings from that would suggest that there is information referred into professional standards that is probably better dealt with as performance or line manager conversations. But clearly once we have that information, we will then deal with it if it's appropriate to do.
And do you think the issue in putting that information into professional standards is an issue about confidence for officers?
So I think it is a confidence issue for line managers and officers. I think that's nationally recognised in reports like the Kane report from 2019, and that's something that we're working from L&D with. So I've done an input in June this year at Senior Leaders Day, so all of the senior leaders in the organisation about what PSD deal with, how to deal with it differently, and professional standards are working with learning and development now to make sure we've got a big time slot on the sergeant to inspector promotions and the PC to sergeants, which will follow. And it's about giving staff those supervisory skills and that confidence to have difficult conversations on challenge.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. You'll be aware of the contents of the HMIC FRS inspection report, which took place on the 2nd of November 2022. And of course, that revealed some extremely damaging and concerning findings, comments and observations. The inspector who was responsible for the preparation of that report said that if the police are to rebuild public trust and protect their own female officers and staff, vetting must be much more rigorous and sexual misconduct taken more seriously. We found evidence of poor decision-making in police vetting, inconsistent handling of misconduct cases, a lack of effective monitoring of officers' IT use, all of which can lead to devastating consequences. Yet despite repeated warnings, including several from us, not enough has been done to improve standards and stamp out misogyny and predatory behaviour in policing. Given the risks involved with recruiting officers at the scale and speed required by the Uplift programme, it's essential that police leaders act now on our recommendations. Our report highlights they simply cannot afford to wait any longer, and you'll be aware that the Home Secretary asked HMIC FRS to update on the progress made on those findings on the 11th of May 2023, which they did, and they concluded there's undoubtedly been some improvement since our inspection, but not all forces can demonstrate acceptable progress on some recommendations. And indeed, they found continuing causes of concern, which included connections with organised crime groups, a history of allegations of domestic abuse, history of allegations of dishonesty, including a criminal charge, unexplained debts, deliberately omitted significant information from vetting application forms. So I suppose my overarching point is, what reassurance can there be that not just West Midlands Police, of course, but the wider policing service, what reassurance can the public have, and indeed police officers and staff working within West Midlands Police, what reassurance can be given that these issues are being taken seriously, they are being dealt with, the issue is being gripped, and those 43 recommendations that the HMIC FRS made are actually being implemented and are going to make a material and significant difference?
So I'm really confident that we have understood all of the actions from the HMIC in November. So of the 42 that there were, and there were 5 AFIs, 28 of those were for forces. We immediately, with some of the work we'd already done, had 5 of those signed off and one of the areas for improvement. That's not to say there wasn't some work to do in some of the other areas. And I think it was a very welcome reminder of APP is, the vetting APP is a very light document really, but it's a very helpful and useful document and gave us an opportunity to review our processes in light of those recommendations. The current position we are in with those recommendations is that we have submitted full sign-off all of the recommendations, bar those that are due at the end of October and December, to a central point where the HMIC obviously have 43 forces doing exactly the same, are now going through those recommendations and agreeing which can be signed off. Currently, we have had 4 DIP sampled, of which I haven't got official confirmation, but conversations suggest they are happy with those 4 that we've submitted. They were randomly selected by the HMIC, and they are using as a benchmark to understand the information provided for all of the others. The work is ongoing. What we are looking to introduce in the next couple of months are more DIP sampling across our department. We already have scrutiny groups with our independent advisory group in relation to our vetting checks that we have done and our vetting refusals as well. And we're looking to implement that across the rest of our department to try and understand and ensure that we have got that consistency, that what happens for one individual is not different to another, and we are consistent, doing everything we can to ensure that those that shouldn't be in our organisation aren't. But actually the regulations from February 2020, which we know are under review, do ask us to consider learning in this space as well. And we have seen an increase in the amount of reflective practice that we've issued in the last 18 months. We've seen a reduction in the number of misconduct cases that we've had, but we have seen a significant increase in the number of gross misconduct hearings and accelerated hearings that we've had. So we have definitely got to grips with the regulations, understood where we are going, and we are removing more individuals from our organisation. So it will be a lengthy journey, and we will continue upon it. I'm happy we're in a strong position. The creation of the proof of concept for the integrity unit is to reassure ourselves, not just going forwards, but going backwards. If we have had intelligence previously that someone is linked to an OCG, that we can understand if that is finished, have we dealt with it properly, or actually is there something we can do now revisiting that information? So I'm confident we're doing everything we can. It is really, really important that we get that public trust and confidence back and increase the legitimacy within our communities.
Thank you very much. In view of time, we'll need to conclude this agenda item. So, Chief Superintendent, thank you very much for your attendance and for presenting your report and answering our questions. It's much appreciated. Thank you. It's important that we remind ourselves of the circumstances in which the Home Office announced that all police forces must check their workforce against national databases. A police officer had been convicted of 49 extremely serious criminal offences, all of which evidenced abhorrent, appalling and heinous conduct on his part. All police officers, as is the case with any profession, have a duty to comply with the highest standards of conduct, ethics, integrity and professionalism. That is non-negotiable. If there are any police officers that are incapable of grasping or understanding that basic principle, then they have no place in the police service. And I'll continue to hold Westminster Police to account to ensure that it complies with vetting procedures, performance manages officers and staff, and deals with complaints and misconduct. The work on our Fairness and Belonging Plan, the Forces programme to improve conduct and ethical standards, and the steps set out indeed in this paper are all part of the action that is being taken. And I'm committed to constant and unremitting action to hold Westminster Police to account to ensure that the 43 recommendations set out in the National Report of HMI CFRS on vetting, misconduct and misogyny, dated 2nd of November 2022, are implemented in full, and in particular, unsuitable people are prevented from joining in the first place. Any misconduct within the force is identified, and officers and staff are dismissed if they are not fit to serve the public. Thank you. Agenda item 8 is Deputy Chief Constable update. This is an update on operational policing matters that can be discussed in the public domain. Deputy Chief Constable.
Thank you, Commissioner. I was just going to touch very briefly on 3 headline issues. So the first one is at the start of today's board, Commissioner, you described the improvements that the force has shown in relation to our telephony and our responsiveness around 999 and 101. But as discussed with you at the start of this week, September this year, because that was the start of summer, in case anybody missed it, the weather was very good and the demand on calls for service, not just here, but across the country, was very high. And we saw some slippage in terms of our performance. The pleasing bit from our perspective as a chief officer team is that saw us, in terms of 999 and 101 service delivery for September, drop down to about 8th place nationally out of 43 forces. You think where we were 12 months ago, we were very near the bottom, so one blip was taken to 8. I'm confident that in October we're back at the very top tier of telephony and performance. So I guess I'll highlight that to show, one, we are not immune to demands in increasing demand, but actually our responsiveness has mean that we've dropped a little bit, but still staying at the top percentile. The second thing then I just wanted to highlight is the last month or so has seen an uptick in some of the neighbourhood crime types, so burglary and robbery. Now, some of that is seasonally expected because as the daylight hours change and we enter the autumn and winter, acquisitive crime does increase. But we've reacted to that already. So ACC Hill chairs our force tasking process, and we've just identified those 2 thematic areas as tactical priorities for the next couple of months, and we'll keep them under review through the broader ACC Hill chairs, but also through the force performance data I chair, and of course we will keep you updated, Commissioner, if that is anything over and above that. But whilst it's a data-driven response, we can't lose sight of the victim of all of those people, all of those offences are people with families and homes, and we need to be reactive to it. And then the final point, which is perhaps the most substantive one to give an update, is Operation BioTask is the West Midlands Police response to the events in Israel and Palestine, the impact on our communities and the associated protests. So we've got a bespoke operation. ACC Claire Bell is the dedicated Gold Commander for it. She's actually on leave at the moment, so for the next week or so, ACC Mike O'Hara will be performing the role of Gold. We're going back permanently to Claire on return from her leave. That has a number of facets to it. So, of course, the number one aspect from our perspective is engagement with all affected communities. Chief Constable has done some of that, and Commissioner, we're grateful for your support because we know that you've done some of that as well. It is our role to provide reassurance, to support communities, to be sensitive, but also to police and enforce the law. We have already seen a number of protests on a variety of scale. This weekend that was just passed, we saw a large protest here in Birmingham of over 2,000 people. It had a dedicated command structure in place. We included in our Force Contact Centre where the Silver Commander is based representatives from the IAG there to sit in and observe the policing operation, give us feedback, but also listen to the steps that the Silver Commander was taking. I'm really pleased to tell the board, I've already shared this with the Commissioner, that the policing of the totality of that protest, the only people we actually deployed on the ground were 3 protest liaison officers. We didn't deploy any other resources. Now, that's not to say we didn't have other resources available to us, but using just protest liaison officers, we were able to police the entirety of the process. The final point to add on that is so far since the events in Israel and the subsequent events in Gaza, we have identified 25 offences associated with all of the protest and reaction by our communities. Now, that's not 25 of people who have yet been processed, but that's 25 offences. Some of those will have been arrested and charged, some will be still to dealt with. It is our job to police the law in accordance to it. We are listening to and following the national directions and national expectations. And there are, of course, things, and those that watched the media yesterday will have seen the Metropolitan Commissioner giving his update. There are, of course, things that some community groups will not like on the streets, but that does not mean to say that they are offences. So we're alive to it, we're keeping it under review, we're listening to representatives across the whole swathe of the area that we police. And so far, we are content with the position that we're in, but it is challenging and it will continue to be so, which is why we've got a dedicated operation led by a chief officer. And that's it, Commissioner. I'm going to update on any first the 3 big issues, but obviously Biotas being the biggest one.
Thank you very much, Deputy Chief Constable. Agenda item 9 is Strategic Policing and Crime Board Work Plan, and this consists of the work plan and actions and future lines of inquiry, which are both simply for noting today. There are 4 actions, all of which have been responded to by Westminster Police, and are therefore pleased to note there are currently no agreed actions outstanding. Agenda item 10 is date of the next meeting, and that will be on Tuesday, 28th of November 2023. I want to thank everyone who's attended and contributed to this meeting of the Strategic Policing and Crime Board today. It's much appreciated. This completes the public agenda for this meeting of the Strategic Policing and Crime Board. We'll now be moving to a closed private session in order to take, firstly, agenda item 11, which is the confidential item relating to the update on Operation Fairstay, data wash, and secondly, agenda item 12, which is use of covert surveillance powers. So I formally declare the public part of the board meeting closed. Thank you.